Welcome back to the channel, guys. Today we're going to be talking about one of my favorite bass fishing lures of all time. I've been fishing this bait a ton down here in Florida over the past few years of coming down here, and it catches me fish when nothing else will. So today we're going to break down every little trick that I know about this dude and teach you a bunch of different ways to fish the Zoom speed worm and try and catch some fish down here in Florida. So let's get to talking about some gear, baits, everything you need to actually fish this technique. Then we're gonna get back out here on the water and throw this dude around, show you a couple different ways to fish it and things you can do to catch more fish on a speed worm here. So let's get right to it. All right, so before we get to fishing the speed worm and showing you all the different tricks about this guy, let's go through the rod, reel, line setup, the lure, everything like that. We'll show you everything you need to know about it, bait-wise, and then we'll go out on the water and show you how to fish it and everything like that. So this is basically what I use for a speed worm. It's what I use for almost any Texas rig that I'm gonna fish, and it's just a straight Icon worm and jig rod from Cashin, 7 foot, fast, medium heavy. Basic setup. Probably everyone has this setup already. It's probably the first setup I ever got after a spinning rod, and it works for just about everything. So if I'm using a worm, this is probably the rod that I'm going to be fishing it on. I have a Corrado MGL on here, 7 gear ratio with 14-pound test line fluorocarbon on there. That's what I'm going to go with 95% of the time when I'm fishing just a basic worm Texas rig. Swimming it through that stuff, I might go to braid sometimes, like 30-pound braid, but more often than not, I'm just going to use the 14-pound test fluorocarbon. I'm going to swim it on the edges of stuff anyway, and then I'm gonna drag it on the edges of stuff. So there's different ways you can fish it, and we're gonna talk about that as we get out on the water. But the rod, reel, and line setup stays the same. That's what I'm gonna be fishing it on. And then from there, a couple of the things that I like to use when I'm rigging it up, I'll always put a bobber stop on first because I wanna have that bait and weight stay together the whole time, especially when I'm swimming it. That way I can keep it all together and it'll work its way through all the grass. If you are gonna drag it and you're not doing any swimming with it, you could leave it unpegged and you'll get a couple more bites that way, or you'll be able to land more fish because the weight's not gonna pop the hook out of the fish's mouth. But I'm usually using such a lightweight anyway that I just peg it, and it makes it easier for me to be more versatile. So I'll put a bobber stop on first, then I'll put anywhere from a 1/8 to a 1/4 ounce weight. 1/4, you gotta be really fishing that bait deep for me to use a 1/4. And the 1/8, I'm really fishing that bait shallow or trying to work it like a top water. You can go even lighter than a 1/8 and try and keep it up in the water column or however you wanna fish it. My go-to is a 3/16. So if I'm gonna fish one weight, it's gonna be a 3/16 ounce. I'll put that on there, and then I'll put a 3/0 extra wide gap hook on there. That's what I'm gonna go with 99% of the time. And then obviously we're gonna be using the Zoom speed worm. I was using Junebug Red down in Florida, but they make a bunch of colors. You can use whatever one works best on your body of water. If you're going to fish in Florida, Junebug Red is probably the way to go. But that's just me saying that from experience and having used that. Anything with red in it or purple is the way to go. So red and purple together works really good. Golds work good. Sungill is a color that I've worked with really well down there. Watermelon red is another one. And then up in the north, like green pumpkin, watermelon red, those are the colors that I'm gonna go with up here. And then you have your speed worm. So we'll show you how to rig it up out there on the water and everything like that. But you're basically just gonna Texas rig this guy, and then you can swim it around. They make the regular size, and then they make the Magnum. I have fished the Magnum. If I'm gonna do that, I'm gonna also use the same weight sizes. I'm gonna go up to a 5/0 hook, and I'll go to a 7.3 rod with 17-pound test fluorocarbon. That's the only difference if you're gonna use the bigger one. I'll just change out some of my terminal tackle there, and that'll be it. And then the biggest thing with the speed worm, you can fish it up in the water column swimming, you can drag it on the bottom and it has the curly tail action, or you can even take and rip this tail off right here at the very end, and you basically have a Senko. I just usually do that if I'm trying to get more life out of my baits. A lot of times I'll be fishing this, you'll have a fish come up and nip at the tail, and they'll rip that tail off, and you'll come back with just a Senko. You can literally just pitch it back out there and catch a fish on that bait before you throw it away anyway. You just can no longer swim it at that point. But it's a very versatile bait, catches a ton of fish. So let's head out on the water. We'll show you how and where to fish this thing and catch us a bunch of fish on the Zoom speed worm. All right, now that we talked about gear, let's go ahead and rig this guy up. So first thing is, you'll notice it has that little split paddle tail on there, and that's gonna create the action of this bait. There really is no wrong way to rig this up. It doesn't matter if the paddle is like up, down, whatever. I always prefer to put it up. That's just a personal preference. So what I'll do is I'll make sure that paddle is facing upwards. I'll take my hook and stick it through the front of the bait like I'd Texas rig anything else. Come out the bottom. I'll bring it up. I'll spin it around onto the hook shank, match up my hook there, and then I'll go ahead and just Texas rig that guy, pull the weight up next to the head, and then slide down our bobber stop, and you can see our tail is now upright. I've also rigged it down. I've never really rigged it sideways. I try to avoid doing that if possible. Obviously, it's not going to catch you less fish if you have it one side or the other. It just comes through cover a little better, I think, if it's vertical. So that's the way I rig it like that. We got a 3/16 ounce weight on here and 14-pound test line like we talked about, so we can get that bait down in the water a little bit. And then other than that, we're just gonna show you different ways to fish this dude. So I fish it a couple different ways down here in Florida. My #1 way is literally like a spinnerbait. You fish it exactly as you would a spinnerbait, chatterbait, whatever, but it comes through cover better than anything else down here in Florida because it's a Texas rigged bait. So if you can see up in front of me here, there's a ton of submerged grass, little Kissimmee grass stalks sticking up, all kinds of stuff tucked up on the bank up there. I can throw that all the way up there on the bank and then just slowly wind it through there like a spinnerbait. Slowly working its way through all of those little pieces of grass, everything like that. And a lot of times those fish will just be sitting there and it'll come in front of their face and they just ambush it like they would any other bait. A lot of times they just sit in this grass and wait for little bait fish or shiners to come by. That's like the main food down here in Florida. So if you can make your bait look like that, that's the perfect way to get some bites. So we're just gonna slowly reel it through there. I reel it pretty slow so I can keep it down in the water column, but you could rig this weightless and fish it like a topwater, or you could just reel it a lot faster and keep it right below the surface like this. It's all personal preference or the mood of the fish. Different days, they might eat it different ways. And then as we get across the lake here, hopefully we'll catch a couple actually reeling the bait. When we get across the lake, I'll show you a couple other ways on some docks over here that you can fish it even more versatile. Like you could truthfully cast this bait out there and start winding it back in, and then it lands in a hole in the grass and just stop and let it sink down to the bottom, and then drag it like a Texas rig through the grass and see if you get any bites that way. And then you can go right back to reeling it in and get bites that way. So it's super versatile, but for now, let's get to fishing this thing and see what we can do with it. All right, so we haven't been able to get one actually reeling the bait yet, but we've approached these docks here, and the other way to actually fish this bait is just as a regular Texas rig. So I'll go ahead and actually pitch it to the poles of the docks. I can skip it underneath, and I'll just drag it on the bottom to see if there's any inactive fish that would want a Texas rig underneath these docks. So let's go ahead and pitch around some of these docks and reel in between, see what we can catch. So then what I'll do after flipping all those poles is I can take a cast way down at the base of the dock and see if there's anybody home way up there by reeling it back, just like I would any other area. So there's a bunch of like grass, there's some bait moving around and stuff up there, so I'll just cover that water quickly with some longer casts. There we go. He's baby, but we got one just winding it through all this big grass flat out here. Look at the size of that dude. Oh my gosh. We've been struggling today. That is literally the first bass I've caught all day. It's 12:30. See you, dude. But yeah, we were just slowly winding that through the grass and he loaded up on it. It's as easy as that. I mean, I can cover all this grass flat just by doing that. I throw it out there, just wind it in nice and slow. Usually they hit it a little bit harder than that guy, but that thing was only as big as the bait. So now we also have a dock right to the left of us here. So we'll probably throw under there a few times too and see if we can get one actually flipping the bait underneath the dock and just letting it sink down to the bottom, just to show you that this bait is very, very versatile and what you can do with it. The other thing you can do, if the fish really don't want the action and you've already had this rigged up and you feel like you need to throw a Senko in somewhere, you can literally pinch the tail off this thing and it'll look just like a Senko. I don't do that too often because it doesn't have the same mass as a Senko. It's not as salted, but you could pinch the tail off right there and it would basically give you a Senko profile. If you wanted to get if you wanted to get some more life out of your baits, if one happens to eat the tail off of one, you could just keep throwing it without the tail and pitching and flipping it, and you can catch fish that way too. So that being said, we caught a tiny one. Let's see if we can get one underneath this dock, flipping this bait around. We'll throw it right there too, see if we can get one off the point in the Kissimmee grass. It has taken all day. I've been through a couple different videos that they won't cooperate on. It's been brutal out here, but we're making it work. So right here, I'll just throw it right underneath that dock. That was a terrible cast, but you never know. And we'll just pitch our way all around this dock and hit all the poles and see what happens. There's one out in the middle of the lake, just swimming it. I literally was casting a backlash out and we caught us a fish. They are in the mood to chase today. He's not big. I can't seem to get him going on this worm, so I think we're gonna switch it up to some other videos here. It's also starting to rain, so we might have to put the big camera away, but we'll see. Unideal Florida conditions, but so no matter where you like to fish, give the speed worm a try. If you want to check another speed worm video out, check this one out right here. I talked more about how to fish that bait. We're gonna let this dude go and get back to fishing, but make sure you hit the subscribe button so you don't miss any more of my fishing videos coming up. Thanks for watching.